When we see Ahsoka Tano wielding lightsabers in Star Wars Rebels, The Mandalorian, and now in her own show, she's wielding the two white lightsabers. But what is the real story on how they came to be? Today I want to bring you part of the book, Ahsoka, where she kills an Inquisitor, then tells Rebel leader Bail Organa how she got the white lightsabers from the Inquisitor. It's really interesting, and before we begin, the short series Tales of the Jedi, it shows Ahsoka kill an Inquisitor, but we never see what happens with the lightsabers, and today we get the book interpretation, which is super cool to see. It shows Ahsoka's power, and includes much more detail throughout. So when we jump into the story, an Inquisitor has found Ahsoka on the planet Rada. She senses him, he calls out to her. That's where our story starts today. So getting right into the book, with the Inquisitor, the Sixth Brother, and Ahsoka. Jedi! A harsh voice rang out. It seemed to come from every direction at once. Ahsoka cast out with her senses, looking for the source. You have something I want, she said. It would be easier if she could get the gray creature to keep talking. Poor little Caden Larte, said the creature. Ahsoka narrowed in on his location, so hopeful that her Jedi friend would come for her. I had to tell her that Jedi don't have friends. Jedi don't have attachments of any kind. They're heartless, they're cold, they don't even understand what love is. Ahsoka said, I don't even know who taught you about the Jedi, but they seem to have left out a few things. You should ask for better lessons. I told Caden that you weren't a real Jedi, the creature said. There, Ahsoka had him. Now she just had to wait for the right moment. I told her that you were probably so scared of me that you were 12 systems away and never coming back. I'm actually happy to be wrong, the creature said. She felt him jump off the roof of the building behind her, and she turned. She could no more identify his species in person than she could from his picture. He was taller than she was, even with the height she'd added in the past few years, and very broadly built. He was clearly very strong, and with the body armor he wore, he was a formidable opponent. He was still wearing his helmet, and his face shield was up, as though he needed to see her clearly while they fought. That was another difference in their training, Ahsoka thought. She could fight completely blind if she had to. Though blind and without her lightsabers, that might be pushing it. She focused her attention on his chest, where movement began. She felt the force flowing through her as his lightsaber flared to life. She could hear its hum, a dark counterpoint to the song of her own crystals, now quite nearby. Ahsoka cleared her mind of all distractions. The creature struck, and Ahsoka deflected his blows before they fell. She read his feelings through the force that connected them, and she tracked the movement of his shoulders, elbows, and wrists, pushing them away so that they always missed their targets. Furious, he doubled his efforts, striking for her head and chest. What the gray creature lacked in finesse, he made up for in brute strength. He pushed Ahsoka back toward the line of houses, and she let him, still taking his measure as a fighter. When she reached the front step of the house behind her, she jumped off of it, using the force to propel herself in an elegant flip over his head. She easily avoided the frantic swing of his lightsaber as she flew over him, then landed in a crouch on the other side, ready to continue. Impressive, he said. You're easily impressed, Ahsoka replied. I'm only just getting started. She felt more people behind her, and realized that someone in the Imperial compound had gotten wind of what was going on. The walls were lined with stormtroopers, all of them pointing blasters at her. At least it didn't look like they'd added any reinforcements since she'd left. She ducked down a side street, out of their line of fire, and the gray creature followed her. He held his lightsaber aloft, and it began to spin. The effect was interesting, a deadly circle of light inside instead of a blade, but Ahsoka wasn't intimidated by it. The creature's entire strategy relied on overpowering his opponent. She had other options. What are you? She asked. Who made you like this? I serve the Empire, the creature said. You certainly have a sense for drama, Ahsoka said. She reached out for him again, this time for his hands and fingers, and for the balance of weight borne by his hips and knees. She felt something awaken in her, every combat lesson Anakin had ever taught. She remembered how to stand and how to hold the blades. She pushed her opponent's fingers too far apart and overturned his balance. She remembered, and she could make him forget. He staggered back, surprised at how her power over him, even at arm's length, but not yet overcome. "I have a sense for power," he said, "and you do not have enough to resist me for much longer, weaponless as you are." That was where he was wrong. She wasn't weaponless. No Jedi ever was. The creature stepped toward her, close enough for her to touch. His spinning lightsaber held off attacks from the sides, but was vulnerable from the front. Just as she'd reached for her first crystal all those years ago, Ahsoka stretched out a hand. Sensing her intent at the last moment, the Inquisitor tried to disconnect his weapon and fight with 2 blades instead of 1, but it was spinning too quickly for him to do it. Ahsoka's hand landed almost gently on the metal, and the Force was with her. The hilt cracked at her touch. A sharp whine reached Ahsoka's ears, the dark and light song of crystals struggling for balance. She realized she needed to jump back even further. She must have nicked the power connection that channeled the crystals inside his hilt, and now it was overloading. If he didn't deactivate it soon, it was going to explode. Before she could even reconsider shouting a warning, the red lightsaber burst into a mess of noise and light. Bright spots pricked at her eyes, and then all was quiet. The creature wasn't going to bother her anymore. He lay in the street, his face burned a mess, the shell of his lightsaber still clutched in his hands. If he'd been able to fight her with his face shield down, he might have survived the blast. She wondered who had trained him, and if there were others. Someone had twisted the potential for good in this creature and turned him to the dark side. Someone had made him like this. Someone Ahsoka knew, who was still out there, and who must be prevented from finding other children, if she could manage it. She reached down and closed his helmet, covering the ruin of his face. It was the only compassion she could show him. She had work to do. Kneeling beside her fallen foe, Ahsoka sifted through the wreckage of his lightsaber hilt. The crystals that had powered his lightsaber were no longer contained by metal, but their song had not dimmed. She held them in one hand, almost shaking as the familiarity of them coursed through her, while the other hand retrieved the half-finished hilts that she carried with her. These lightsabers wouldn't have the decorative handles that she preferred, and her grip would be affected until she had time to truly finish them. She was missing a few key components. They had to be specifically made, but the creature's ruined hilt was before her. Quickly, she picked through the wreckage again, this time paying closer attention to the inner workings of the weapon, and smiled when she found what she needed. They would do for now. Ahsoka could hear the Imperials approaching. Her duel had made them hesitate, but now they were on high alert. She pushed aside her sense of urgency, even though she was in a hurry. Meditation came easily, as if she were sitting in safety in the Jedi Temple itself, instead of a dusty street with her enemies closing in. Her mind's eye sorted the pre-assembled components of those she had just retrieved into order, locking each into place with the others. When Ahsoka opened her hands, she was not surprised to find that 2 lightsabers, rough and unfinished, were waiting. They would need more work, but they were hers. When she turned them on, they shone the brightest white. Ahsoka then went on to save herself and her friends that she was helping from the Imperials, and once that was done, she was able to do what we saw in Tales of the Jedi, contacting Bail Organa. But we get even more of that now, as Ahsoka and Bail talk about her experiences out there, and the new lightsabers. They sat quietly for a moment, and then Bail leaned forward. "They told me your new lightsabers are white," he said, and she heard awe in his voice. "May I see them?" he asked. It was safe enough in Bail's office, surrounded by the void of space. Ahsoka stood up and unclipped the lightsabers from her side. She activated them, and Bail's office was filled with a soft, white light, gleaming off the windows and reflecting the stars. The office was much smaller than a training room, being shipboard, but she did a few of the basic forms for him anyway. She would never get tired of the way they glowed. She hadn't thought she'd ever replace her original blue ones, and she still had time to finish the handles, but these were all right. "They're beautiful, Ahsoka," he said. She turned them off, bowed slightly, and sat back down. "I've never seen white ones before," Bail mused. "They used to be red," Ahsoka said. "When the creature had them, they were red, but I heard them before I ever saw him on Rada, and I knew that they were meant for me." "You changed their nature?" Bail asked. "I restored them," Ahsoka replied. "I freed them. The red crystals were corrupted by the dark side when those who wielded them bent them to their will. They call it making the crystal bleed. That's why the blade is red." "I had wondered about that," Bail said. "I spent a lot of time with the Jedi, but I never asked questions about where the lightsabers came from. I don't suppose they would have told me anyway. These feel familiar, Ahsoka said. If I had to guess, I would say they were looted from the Jedi Temple itself. And that's the story in canon of how Ahsoka went from blue lightsabers to no lightsabers to white lightsabers. In the time since Revenge of the Sith, she'd been building lightsaber hilts, but didn't have a crystal. Now, when encountering this Inquisitor, the crystals were calling to her even before the duel. They were calling to her because they'd been bled red against their will and needed someone to save them. That someone was Ahsoka. I really like how the battle was described. Ahsoka's senses, her compassion for her enemy. Her character is really well done in the book. I cannot wait for the show. I think it's going to be great. Let me know what you thought. What the process is, getting the white lightsabers, bleeding them, but kind of the opposite, purifying them, saving them. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought, and I'll see you in the next video.